Thomas Jefferson Beale. It's probably not a name you've heard of. He's behind a 200-year-old mystery in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. He is the credited author of the Beale Papers, also known as the Beale Ciphers. They are a treasure map of sorts to the Beale Treasure worth millions today.
Curious and sometimes obscure pieces of history make some of the best stories. We are Vince and Angela. We travel mostly full-time and love history. We run into a lot of these stories and share them weekly in short form here on Historic Footnotes.
The Beale Papers consist of 3 ciphers explaining what the treasure is, where the treasure is, and who is entitled to the treasure. The ciphers have never been fully decoded. However, the cipher explaining what the treasure consists of was decoded using the Declaration of Independence in the late 1800s. Sound a little familiar? The movie National Treasure is said to be loosely based on the story. But now it's time to tell the story of the real Thomas Jefferson Beale. He fled his family home in central Virginia to New Orleans after a duel. The duel was called because Thomas was flirting with the man's niece, Julia Hancock Clark, the wife of explorer William Clark. He was off exploring, but that's another story, so her uncle attempted to defend her honor. Believing him dead, Beale knew he would be in trouble. He fled Virginia and ended up in New Orleans. He had been introduced to New Orleans through stories of money, power, and excitement relayed by none other than Aaron Burr. His home life in Virginia was much different than the life he built for himself in New Orleans. His Virginia family considered him the black sheep. The son of a prominent businessman and family, Thomas was left just 5 shillings in inheritance in his father's very unequal estate settlement. This was the equivalent of a week's wages for a carpenter at the time, despite the fact that his father's estate was among the wealthiest in the country. Arriving in New Orleans, Beale met and married the daughter of the governor of Western Florida, and opened the Planters and Merchants Hotel and various other gambling houses. He was considered a prominent businessman for the area. This led Andrew Jackson to approach Beale to gather his friends and assist with the Battle of New Orleans. Beale led the Beale Riflemen militia during the battle and is noted throughout the battlefield park for his contributions. His riflemen were comprised of attorneys and business owners. However, research is tough for Beale during this time in New Orleans. A few other things were happening that overshadowed his contributions. Marie Laveau was just beginning her family. The pirate Jean Lafitte and his brother were likely drinking at Beale's gambling hall and fighting in the Battle of New Orleans with Beale. The axeman of New Orleans was killing Italian grocers and demanding the city play jazz music to appease him. And Madame Lalaurie was hosting dinner parties while her guests were unaware of the torture that was happening under the same roof. Jefferson Beale died in September 1820. It was later in the century 3 ciphers accredited to Beale were found near Bedford, Virginia. Only one of the 3 has ever been decoded. It states there is a treasure worth millions, by 1800 standards, buried in Virginia. The cipher was decoded using the Declaration of Independence, and yes, the movie National Treasure is said to loosely be based on the story. The stories we get about Beale and his treasure originate from an innkeeper, Robert Morris, in Lynchburg, Virginia, and are told through J.B. Ward. Ward published the stories in a pamphlet titled The Beale Papers. The pamphlet was published in 1885 and sold for 15 cents. Morris describes Beale with seemingly admiration and in great detail. He recounts that Beale arrived at the Washington Hotel in January 1820 with 2 other men seeking accommodations for the winter. All appeared to be well-educated gentlemen, but the other 2 left within a few days. They returned to Richmond, where they said they resided. Beale stayed until spring. Morris describes him as a favored and popular guest, especially with the ladies. Morris continues with words from Ward's pamphlet.
In person, he was about 6 feet in height, with jet black eyes and hair of the same color, worn longer than was the style at the time. His form was symmetrical and gave evidence of unusual strength and activity, but his distinguishing feature was a dark and swarthy complexion, as if much exposure to the sun and weather had thoroughly tanned and discolored him. This, however, did not detract from his appearance, and I thought him the handsomest man I had ever seen, although he was a model of manly beauty, favored by the ladies and envied by men. To the first he was reverentially tender and polite, to the latter affable and courteous, when they kept within bounds. But if they were supercilious or presuming, the lion was aroused, and woe to the man who offended him. He remained with me until about the latter end of the following March, when he left with the same friends who first accompanied him to my house, and who had returned days before. After this I heard nothing from him until January 1822, when he once more made his appearance, the same genial and popular gentleman as before, but, if possible, darker and swarthier than ever. His welcome was a genuine one, as were all delighted to see him. In the spring, about the same time, he left again, but before doing so handed me this box, which, as he said, contained papers of value and importance, and which he desired to leave in my charge until called for hereafter. Of course, I did not decline to receive them, but little imagined their importance until his letter from St. Louis was received. This letter I carefully preserved, and it will be given with these papers. The box of iron, carefully locked, and of such weight as to render it safe in a secure place, where it cannot be disturbed until such time as it should be demanded by its owner. The letter alluded to above was the last communication I ever received from Beale, and I never saw him again. The box was left in my hands in the spring of 1822, and by authority of his letter I should have examined its contents in 1832, 10 years thereafter, having heard nothing from Beale in the meantime. But it was not until 1845, some 23 years after it came into my possession, that I decided upon opening it. During that year I had the lock broken, and with the exception of the 2 letters addressed to myself and some old receipts, found only some unintelligible papers, covered with figures and totally incomprehensible to me. According to his letter, these papers convey all the information necessary to find the treasure he has concealed, and upon you devolves the responsibility of recovering it. Should you succeed, you will be amply compensated for your work, and others near and dear to me will likewise be benefited. The end is worth all your exertions, and I have every hope that success will reward your efforts.
The treasure has been highly sought after ever since Ward's Beale paper was published. People have traveled from all over the world to dig where they are certain the treasure exists. Recently, the legend attracted the attention of Hollywood with the National Treasure concept, Discovery, and Travel Channel episodes. However, no one has ever announced finding it. It begs the questions. Does it exist at all? Was it already recovered? Was it all just a clever marketing game to sell Ward's pamphlet? 2022 marks 200 years since Beale left the box with Morris, an acquaintance seemingly unknown to him, but trustworthy enough to leave with a charge worth millions. Answers are coming. You can follow along on our site as I share the untold story of my ancestor, Thomas Jefferson Beale, and the Beale Treasure. Updates will be shared on fittingandadventure.com.
If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and give us a rating to help more people find historic footnotes.